Sherman Oaks, California, a Wednesday afternoon at the Chuck Norris Karate Studio on Ventura Boulevard. Private students sat along the back bench waiting for the 5 o'clock class. On the mat, in a fresh white gi, was Steve McQueen. He was 39 years old, the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He was 2 weeks from flying to France to start filming Le Mans. In the next 60 seconds, he was about to challenge Chuck Norris to a real fight in Chuck Norris's own dojo, in front of 6 students who would carry what they were about to see for the rest of their lives. McQueen was 5'10", 175 pounds, genuinely athletic, a competitive desert motorcycle racer, a former Marine, a man who did his own stunts when the studio allowed it. He had been training privately with Chuck Norris 3 days a week for 6 months, and he was not bad. By every measure that mattered to him, at 4:15 that Wednesday afternoon, he was the bigger name, the more famous man, and the one the students on the bench had paid to be in a room with. Chuck Norris was 29, 5'10", 180 pounds, a 6-time undefeated middleweight world karate champion who had not lost a tournament match in years. He taught celebrities the same way he taught everyone else. Same drills, same corrections, same expectations. He was not in the habit of being challenged in his own dojo by his own students, and the 6 men on the bench had never seen anyone try. In 4 seconds, with 1 step, Chuck Norris was going to answer the challenge in a way that would still be discussed in Los Angeles dojos 40 years later. The sentence Steve McQueen would speak afterward from the floor would change the direction of Chuck Norris's life. Stay till the end if you want to find out what happened, and make sure you are subscribed. The assumption that Steve McQueen was a pampered Hollywood ego playing dress-up in a gi is wrong. The man who walked up the staircase on Ventura Boulevard that afternoon was a serious athlete who had decided, after half a year of honest work, that he had earned the right to test something. McQueen raced motorcycles competitively in the California desert. He had served in the Marines. He could ride almost anything on 2 wheels better than the professional stunt riders the studios hired to double for him. When he committed to learning something physical, he committed completely. Chuck Norris told people later that McQueen was one of the most dedicated celebrity students he had ever trained. He showed up on time. He listened. He did not complain when Norris corrected him. He treated the dojo with respect. On this particular afternoon, something had shifted in him. Perhaps the heat. Perhaps half a year of accumulated knowledge sitting in his body, making him feel more capable than he actually was. Perhaps the fact that he had been the biggest male movie star in the world for the better part of 3 years, and a man can only hear the word yes so many times before he starts to believe that no does not apply to him anymore. Whatever it was, McQueen was talking. He was not whispering the way a man whispers a private thought to a friend. He was performing the way a man performs a position he wants other men to witness. Chuck Norris was a 6-time undefeated middleweight karate champion. He had won the All-American Karate Championship. He had won the World Professional Middleweight Karate Championship multiple years running. He had not lost a tournament match in years. He was about 5'10", weighed somewhere around 180 pounds, and was put together the way a leopard is put together. Compact, quiet, no wasted motion. He did not talk much. When he taught, he demonstrated more than he explained, and when he did explain, he used short sentences. His policy at the studio was simple. He taught celebrities the exact same way he taught anyone else. Same drills, same corrections, same expectations. If you paid for private instruction, you got Chuck Norris. You did not get a softer version of Chuck Norris because you happened to have your face on a movie poster. Norris was standing at the edge of the mat, arms relaxed at his sides, watching McQueen go through a combination drill on the heavy bag. McQueen was saying that tournament karate was choreography. He said it in that flat-clipped McQueen way, the way he delivered lines on screen, like every word cost $1, and he was trying to save money. He said the points and the trophies and the bowing and the rules about where you could strike and where you could not strike. All of that was theater. He said it was a performance dressed up as a fight. Then he said something that made the 6 men on the bench glance sideways at each other. He said the fights he had done on Bullet, the scuffle in the hotel hallway, the close quarters work, those were closer to real combat than anything Norris had ever scored a point on in a tournament. In fairness to McQueen, there is a version of this argument that is not entirely stupid. There is a real conversation in martial arts about the gap between sport and combat. There is a real critique of point fighting, of stopping after a clean strike, of the way tournament rules can train fighters to pull techniques short. Bruce Lee was making this exact argument at this exact time in this exact city. McQueen was friends with Bruce Lee. He had probably heard some version of this argument over dinner. So when McQueen said that tournament karate was choreography, he was not pulling the idea out of thin air. He was repeating something he had heard from a man whose opinion on the matter was worth something. The problem was that McQueen had not earned the right to say it. Bruce Lee had earned it. Bruce Lee could back up that opinion with his hands. McQueen had been training for 6 months. There is a difference between holding an opinion you have inherited and holding an opinion you have tested. Then McQueen said the sentence. He stopped his combination on the bag. He turned to face Chuck Norris. The 6 men on the bench would later, in their separate accounts given over the next 40 years, describe this moment in almost identical language. They would say that the air in the room changed. They would say that the small sounds of the dojo, the creak of the floorboards, the distant traffic on Ventura, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, all of it seemed to get quieter at once. McQueen looked Chuck Norris in the eye, and he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "I could take you in a real fight, Chuck." Chuck Norris did not move for a moment. He did not change his expression. He did not look at the bench. He did not sigh or shake his head or laugh it off the way. A teacher sometimes laughs off the things students say when they are trying to find out where the edges are. He looked at Steve McQueen for what one of the witnesses later estimated was about 2 full seconds, which is a longer silence than it sounds like when you count it out. And then he set his hands at his sides, palms open, fingers relaxed. Chuck Norris said 2 words, "Show me." That was all. He did not add a qualifier. He did not say, "Take it easy," or "Let's go light," or "Remember, "This is just practice." He said, "Show me." And then he waited. McQueen had a choice in that moment. He could have laughed it off. He could have said he was kidding, or that he meant it as a thought experiment, or that he was just running his mouth, the way men sometimes run their mouths in the late afternoon when they have been sweating for an hour, and the endorphins are doing strange things to their judgment. Any of those exits were available to him. But Steve McQueen was the biggest movie star in the world, and the 6 men on the bench had heard him, and he could not climb back down off the thing he had just climbed up onto without looking smaller than he had looked 30 seconds ago. So he settled his weight onto his back foot, dropped into a fighting stance, and threw a right cross. The whole thing took about 4 seconds, but inside those 4 seconds there were maybe 20 distinct events, and the witnesses spent decades arguing about the exact order. McQueen's right cross was telegraphed. That is the word every witness used, telegraphed. The reason it was telegraphed tells you something about how McQueen had been trained. He had thrown thousands of punches on camera. He had thrown punches in The Magnificent Seven, in The Great Escape, in The Cincinnati Kid, in Bullet. He was very good at throwing camera punches. A camera punch is designed to be visible. A camera punch is designed to read clearly on a 30-foot screen, so that the audience in the back row of the theater can see the shoulder turn, the hip rotate, the fist travel. A camera punch has to be telegraphed, because if it is not telegraphed, the camera misses it. McQueen's body, after 6 months of karate training, still had thousands of hours of camera training underneath it. And when he threw that right cross at Chuck Norris, his shoulder loaded a fraction of a second before his fist moved. His weight shifted, his chin tucked. Everything you would do to make a punch look great on film, McQueen did, because that was the deepest layer of muscle memory he had. Chuck Norris read all of it before the punch was halfway out. He did not block it. He did not even really parry it. He slipped inside it. He stepped diagonally forward and to his own left, which placed his head about 6 inches off the line of the incoming fist. And at the same moment that his head moved off the line, his right hand came up under McQueen's extended right arm, not to deflect it, because there was nothing left to deflect, but to control the elbow joint. His left hand simultaneously gripped the back of McQueen's gi at the shoulder. McQueen's punch passed through empty air. His weight was committed forward. His balance was on his front foot. Chuck Norris, having already controlled the elbow and the shoulder, hooked his own right leg behind McQueen's lead leg in a low sweep, the kind of sweep that does not require force so much as timing, because the opponent's own forward momentum does most of the work for you. McQueen's lead foot lost its connection to the canvas. His other foot was still planted, but with his arm extended and his shoulder controlled, and his weight already moving forward, there was nothing he could do except go where Chuck Norris was sending him. He went down hard, not catastrophically hard, because Norris was controlling the descent, but hard enough that the canvas made a flat slapping sound when his shoulder blades hit it, and hard enough that a small involuntary grunt came out of his chest. One of the men on the back bench, a stuntman named Hal, who had doubled for Lee Marvin and Richard Widmark, and had been in more staged fights than he could count, would later say that the sound was the thing he never forgot. Not the punch, not the sweep, the slap of a body hitting canvas from someone who had not chosen to fall. He said he had heard that sound on movie sets 1,000 times, but always from men who knew they were going to hit the floor and had organized their bones accordingly. McQueen had not organized anything. McQueen had been sent. The off-duty police officer on the bench, who had taken falls in academy training and on real arrests, said the same thing in different words. He said, "You can tell when a man hits the ground, whether he chose the ground or the ground chose him." McQueen had not chosen the ground. The ground had been chosen for him 4 seconds earlier by a man who had not raised his voice. Chuck Norris, who had moved with him all the way down, planted one hand flat on the center of Steve McQueen's sternum and held him there, just one hand, open palm, fingers spread, right at the breastbone. The witnesses always emphasized that part. One hand, not a knee on the chest, not a forearm across the throat, not a complicated grappling hold, just one open hand, placed precisely on the point where the human skeleton is least able to generate leverage from underneath, and Chuck Norris's full body weight balanced over that single point of contact. McQueen tried to move. He was a strong man. He weighed about 175 pounds, and he was in good shape. He tried to bridge up off the canvas, the way a wrestler bridges, and he could not. Chuck Norris's weight was distributed perfectly. The hand on the sternum was not just resting there. It was loaded, and every time McQueen tried to push up, the hand pushed down a fraction harder, and the angle was such that there was nowhere for the force to go. McQueen tried twice, 2 real attempts. He could feel the canvas under his shoulder blades. He could feel his own breath going in and out. He could see the fluorescent lights of the dojo on the ceiling above him, and he could feel exactly how completely he could not move. The 6 men on the back bench did not say anything. Not a sound, not a cleared throat, not a shifted foot. They sat there and they watched. Chuck Norris held the pin for what one of the witnesses later timed in his own memory as about 3 seconds. Though 3 seconds when you are pinned to the floor of a dojo in front of 6 men feels considerably longer than 3 seconds feels when you are sitting on the bench. Then Norris lifted his hand off McQueen's chest, stood up smoothly, took 1 step back, and waited. He did not offer a hand to help McQueen up. That was not unkindness. That was respect. You do not help a man up after a challenge match the way you help a child up after a stumble. You let him stand on his own, because standing on his own is the first piece of dignity he is going to need to rebuild. McQueen sat up on the canvas. He did not stand right away. He sat there with his knees bent and his hands resting on his thighs, and his breath coming in and out hard, not from physical exertion, because the actual exertion had been minimal, but from the surge of adrenaline that comes when your body realizes a fraction of a second too late that it has just been in real danger. He looked at the canvas between his feet. He looked at his own hands. Then he laughed. It was a short laugh, 1 syllable, not a laugh of amusement, not a laugh of embarrassment exactly. It was the laugh of a man who has just been shown, in the most direct and undeniable way available, the exact distance between what he thought he was and what he actually was. It was the laugh of a man recognizing the floor of his own certainty. McQueen had spent 39 years building a self-image. He was the king of cool. He was the man who did his own stunts. He was the man who outraced the police through the hills of San Francisco. He had inhabited that image so completely that he had begun to mistake it for the underlying reality. In 4 seconds on a Wednesday afternoon in August, Chuck Norris had reached underneath the image and shown him the actual man. And the actual man had been pinned to the canvas with one hand. McQueen looked up at Chuck Norris, who was standing there waiting, with that same neutral expression he had worn the entire time. Steve McQueen said the sentence that has been quoted in every biography of Chuck Norris ever written, but which almost nobody quotes in its original context, because the original context is uncomfortable. He said, "You either have a certain presence that comes across on the screen, or you don't. I think you may have it." People love that quote. They love it because it is the moment Steve McQueen pushed Chuck Norris toward acting. It is the moment that 6 years later would lead to Norris's first lead role, and eventually to Lone Wolf McQuade, and Missing in Action, and Walker, Texas Ranger, and the whole second career that made Chuck Norris a household name in a way that tournament karate never could have. The quote is real. It happened. It mattered. But the quote does not function the way most people think it functions. Most people imagine it as a friend's encouragement, a casual aside between training partners, a wise older actor recognizing potential in a younger man and pointing him toward his future. That is not what it was. What it was, when Steve McQueen said it from the canvas of a Sherman Oaks dojo, with his back still warm from the floor, and Chuck Norris standing over him in silence, was something else entirely. It was a defeated man, recognizing that the quality in Chuck Norris which had just pinned him to the floor, that quiet, unhurried, absolutely centered thing, that complete absence of doubt or hesitation, that was the same thing a camera would see and want to follow. McQueen, who had spent 2 decades learning how to manufacture screen presence through technique and instinct and 1,000 small choices, was looking up at a man who had not manufactured anything, who simply had it, the way some men simply have it, and he was acknowledging it. It was not a compliment. It was a transfer. It was Steve McQueen handing Chuck Norris a thing that Steve McQueen had spent his whole life building, and admitting that Chuck Norris had been born with it. Chuck Norris helped him up after that. He did not say much. He nodded once, the way he nodded at the end of every class, and then he turned and walked across the mat to start the 5 o'clock session. The 6 men on the bench got up, bowed, and stepped onto the canvas as if nothing had happened, because that was the rule of the dojo. Whatever happened on the mat stayed on the mat. None of them said a word about it that afternoon. Some of them did not speak about it for years. McQueen showered, dressed, walked down the narrow staircase to Ventura Boulevard, got into his Jaguar, and drove home. He kept training with Chuck Norris for years afterward. The 2 men became close friends. McQueen never made the claim again, in the dojo or anywhere else, that he could take Chuck Norris in a real fight. That was the last time those words were ever said in that room. That night, after the last class had cleared out, and the lights of the dojo had been turned off, Chuck Norris sat in his car in the small parking lot behind the studio. He did not start the engine right away. He sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, and he thought about what Steve McQueen had said from the canvas. You either have it or you don't. I think you may have it. Norris had been a karate champion for years. He had won every trophy there was to win in his weight class. He had built a successful chain of studios. He had a life. He was 29 years old, and he could feel the slow arrival of the moment when a fighter has to start thinking about what comes next, because the body does not stay 29 forever, and the trophies stop meaning what they used to mean. Steve McQueen had just told him that there was another door. 6 years would pass between that August afternoon and Chuck Norris's first lead role in Breaker Breaker in 1977. 11 years would pass before Steve McQueen died of cancer in November of 1980. At the age of 50, McQueen would not live to see Lone Wolf McQuade in 1983, the picture that finally made Chuck Norris a movie star in his own right. He would not live to see the friend he had pushed through that door walk all the way through it. He would not live to be able to say, "I told you," when Lone Wolf McQuade came out and Chuck Norris's face was on the poster, and people walked out of the theater saying that the new guy had a quality about him, a stillness, a certain presence on screen. There were perhaps 6 men scattered now across Los Angeles and Texas and one in Florida who remembered exactly where that quality had first been named out loud. It had been named on the floor of a small studio above a dry cleaner on Ventura Boulevard on a Wednesday afternoon in August of 1969 by a man who was lying on his back on a canvas mat, looking up at the fluorescent lights, with the warm print of a single open hand still pressed against the center of his chest. Out on Ventura Boulevard, the traffic kept moving past, indifferent and ongoing, the way the traffic on Ventura Boulevard has always moved, the way it had been moving at 4:15 that afternoon, when Steve McQueen walked up the staircase a confident man, and the way it kept moving at 5:30 when he walked back down, quieter and a little more honest about who he actually was. Thank you for watching, and make sure you are subscribed to catch the next Chuck Norris story.